The experience of so-called think globally, act locally, if that's possible, why is that so hard? It seems so simple.
I think people get overwhelmed and they feel like I'm already left behind, or they feel a sense of defeat. And again, I think also people don't naturally associate these kinds of acts as relationship, right? They don't see that, in it's relationship centered. Community comes out of relationships. And so maybe there are folks who they don't feel connected to a community yet, or they haven't had the opportunity, or they're waiting, to be found or reached out to. But yeah, it just like, it can take a moment just as quickly as, being turned on to like a new product that's being, shipped at you, or and people are selfish. That's also our nature, right? Like it's hard enough to contend with your own individual life, but then the idea of being asked to make so much space for other people's lives, that's the battle of humanity since the beginning.
This is Uncommon Good, the podcast where we chat to ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. My name is Paulie Reese. Fam, I am delighted to bring to you Siobahn Sun. She is a producer at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. And before that, she worked as a professional opera singer. Here's your content warning for this episode. We talk about trauma, COVID, natural disasters. We have a discussion of anti-Asian racism, and there is explicit language in this episode. More in detail, we talk about emotional labor of Korean identity, the challenges of being a professional musician in the age of AI and streaming, the history of white supremacy in classical music performance and how we can make the work more inclusive, the recent increases in natural disasters and COVID-related collective trauma, the philosophy of beauty and its importance to the human spirit, and, of course, the Yankees and the Phillies. I was delighted to have this chat to a new good friend and a beloved collaborator. Please enjoy my chat to Siobahn. So I do have a bit of a confession. While I was doing my grocery run here just about an hour ago, I was listening to a wonderful YouTube recording of a recital of yours from back in 2020.
Oh, it was like
and
in a church basement.
And you and your accompanist performed Debussy beautifully.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's so kind.
Is that a personal favorite composer for you? Like, it certainly fits your voice, like your tessitura, wonderfully.
Yeah, I love French rap. I think that French rap it's like demanding. It's really demanding in a particular way. And yeah, I think Debussy's beautiful. And beyond that, the pianist, Marion, they had really responded to that piece.
For me, it's length of phrases, it's the color, the emotion of a Debussy piece that you have to be willing to just fully commit to in order for it to be listenable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to get like super pedagogical about it, but I think, French repertoire, there's so much particular style that's baked into that music just to serve the language properly, right? Like the kind of phrases and the cadence, you can always tell if somebody is singing French repertoire and they're not comfortable, with the language, then the phrases don't sound correct, I guess, they don't sound natural. Yeah.
It sounds like a student piece.
Yeah.
So for you, at least my experience of your recital was that it was unhurried. It was a very patient performance. There just felt like this grand luxury of time and delight in every phrase. What sort of work as an artist, like for the inner preparation to on these long phrases that need lots of breath, what sort of like mental state, what sort of mental practice do you cultivate to make that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd be remiss. I'm sure maybe some of your listeners know this about you by now, but Polly, you're also a vocalist, right? Like
That
you
is true.
also
Yeah.
went to conservatory, like you've sung in many different, iterations and ensembles and probably solo. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to dig and see if I can find some stuff on YouTube beyond the things that.
Mama always said you have a face and also a voice for radio. This has not been talked about on the pod yet, but the savvy listener can find a taping of an afternoon quiz show of me doing just a really awful, like very nervous couple bars of Marriage of Figaro.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say it's awful, and you can't tell it's nervous.
Yeah,
They do that. How many people can just like even the most practiced individual and the most like quote unquote long-term professional opera singer, like I don't think it ever is like a natural easy moment when someone's like, hey, can we hear something or whatever. But yeah, kind of going back to your question about like what's the preparation, what's the practice, and I think something that's been a gift for me with singing is, number one, I came to it very late.
Sure.
Lots of people who sing classical Western music, they've been singing since they were like a young teenager, maybe even before that, right? Which is also considered late with peers like instrumentalists. But yeah, for me, I came to it when I was like basically 20, right? It was a long road to get there. It was never a road I intended to get to. And so with that, the luxury of that is that I was way like less inhibited than my peers.
Yeah.
I didn't really care if I sounded bad, and also I think for me that the gift that I think I have is, this very nebulous thing we talk about in vocal practice, which is called musicality, right? And yeah, like I used to have a coach who would say like some singers like they're like basic gifts, and some singers get one if they're lucky, and some singers have like three or whatever, and that's like language learning is one, right? And like one is like supremely good looks, one is like a stick memory, right? Like these are kind of these basic gifts that sometimes you identify in your peers. But yeah, for myself, I think I really always had, a musicality. And what that means for folks who are listening who might not be familiar with that term is like, it's like an inherent sense of like style, feeling, delivery, emotional connection. So really like any piece that I had ever sung or like practiced, even if it was never performed, I always, respond primarily to the text, because that's the great privilege of a vocalist, right? It's like 99% of the time we have privilege of text. No other musician gets that. And that really informs like the feeling. And if I'm singing with a true feeling, carrying that responsibility, I think that the body just sort of follows it, right? Like if you're singing something that's like ethereal and poetic and you're in that space, your body just responds to that, right? It doesn't gear up in the same way like if you're singing like a revenge aria, or if you're singing, like something completely not programmatic and more experimental or whatever,
which are also fun and in their own way.
Yeah
with musicality, what I hear you saying is you just feel it.
Yes. And I know that's kind of like an asshole thing to say. I think it's tied, again, this thing that we hear and experience a lot is like, as a vocalist, your instrument is hidden, right? It's like innate, it's inside you, your body. It's so inextricably linked to your feelings. And that's why you can feel so bad about yourself when your voice isn't like doing what you want it to do or whatever. But yeah, like for me, again, it was just like a great gift that I'm a sensitive person and I've always been that way. And my intuition has been sharpened through a variety of different experiences, and that intuition has made more space for that musical sense.
Intuition is like a really good call for it, and the different sorts of things in our past that help us cultivate that sense of that sixth sense, what it is. Can you point to, would you be comfortable sharing any moments like from the history of Siobahn that stand out as moments that helped cultivate the sense of intuition and musicality? Sure.
Yeah. I'm like, how many minutes in are we to talk about like family trauma already? But I think honestly, I grew up in a household where a lot of responsibility was placed on my shoulders to metabolize like emotions for my parents, and I'm an only child. Or I was an only child for all of my childhood and, only until like relatively recently in my life. So yeah, I still identify as an only child mostly. And certainly
Yeah.
that was, an appropriate way to describe my childhood. So I think I was kind of socialized that way through my parents. And then, yeah, just the constant socialization that happens anyway outside of a home. But, the idea of like cultural influence,
Yeah.
having a background that speaks to different realms of high context, right? And so like sociologically, coming from cultures where it's the demand is quite high for you to anticipate people's
Yes.
reactions to you, or to take on the responsibility and burden for navigating their emotional scape. That was really impressed upon me super early as something that would make me an obedient child or a good child or an extraordinary student or whatever. And so in some ways, yeah, that undue kind of burden that started so early has really primed me to think more about, transmission, whether it's in an artistic sense or just an everyday interaction. I still have to sometimes really wrestle with being like overly biased toward
Yeah.
the others, like, space and feeling and all that before that of my own, which does make you a better opera singer, I think, sometimes. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, premature implied emotional management of others in unreasonable circumstances. We clearly could not be Korean at all. That's not at all who we are.
I mean, it's just like part of the list, right? Part of that definitely like has that network to like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the fun things I think of opera and musical performance in like digging into a text, at least for me, because I remember my early days at Debussy and early operatic work, being an associated male-bodied person and having a lovely, like not quite profundo voice, but low enough to where like you could pass for that, like if it's before like 9 a.m. in the morning. You get railroaded into certain roles, and I think I remember disappearing into characters
Mhm.
being a really novel way to sort of release out some of that energy of the emotional management of others and the other and the sense of the othering that comes from having to hold other people's shit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe it's kind of anarchic to say, but like it is anarchic to say, but art, right? Art
Yeah.
is manipulative, right? It
Yes.
has the same Latin root as artifice, like
Yes.
what we put on and what we hope to kind of engage with and provoke or invoke, these things. It's like, it's a huge part of the process, right? That's why
Hmm.
music is so tied to like all other kinds of manipulation, political, religious, healing
Yeah.
practice, medicine. Like it's all there. It's always been there.
It has a power to communicate even in spite of human limitation.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Which is kind of like a superficial sort of allegory to this, but I always tell people something. I'm a big Yankees fan. I love baseball, period. And I'm a big fan of, watching a lot of the American League teams play through the regular season. But like
Yes.
some people don't know about Yankees games is like they always end with New York, New York, right? If you go to Yankee,
Hmm.
see a home game, they play Frank Sinatra's New York, New York. And when you win, a lot of people sing along. And it's a really powerful thing to be in a stadium with like tens of thousands of people, sometimes
Hmm.
almost 40,000 people singing this song, right? And there are not a lot of other baseball teams that have that kind of musical ritual, right?
Hmm.
I mean, except for like the national anthem and the take me out to the ball game, at the seventh
Yes.
inning or whatever. But this thing that really belongs to the identity of a collective fan
Yes.
base, so I think about that all the time when people talk about the power of sung music.
Since we're on the topic of team sport and we're in a pro sports season where multiple Philly teams have reached national championship games, I need to apologize. Though, thank you. I need to apologize on behalf of my city for the behavior of our fans. I'm thinking we actually just had the news release that they have doubled the standard supplies of telephone pole grease
Yes.
that are used. If you know anything about Philly,
Yeah.
so the Phillies were just in the World Series. The Eagles are headed to the Super Bowl. We when we won the National League. Am I saying that correctly? The National League Championship. I think I am. I wish I knew. I wish I could speak intelligently about sports.
You are. You're doing great.
Thank you, Vanity. What? No, when we won last week, even before the final score had become official, because it was very clear from early in the game that we were going to win unless we just walked off the field for the end of the last quarter. That's right, they're called quarters. There were already official announcements by the city, I think on the city of Philadelphia's Twitter, that they were greasing the telephone poles in order to discourage fans from climbing them. And they do this intentionally through the city government social media to be like, please
Please don't.
just don't, like, please don't do anything stupid, like, don't make us have to arrest you, because we'll have to arrest like all of South Philadelphia and all of Northeast Philadelphia.
Yeah, if they can make it through the flipped cars and everything.
Exactly.
The funny thing is, like, subsequently on Twitter, right? I saw after that was sort of broadcast, all
Yeah.
these people. I was really laughing at. This is the beauty of Twitter, right? This is like the funny
Yeah.
part. All these people came on saying, this is a centuries old Italian tradition. They like provided all these like old photos, like dating back hundreds of years, of people climbing poles and like hanging smoked meats, like during celebratory seasons, and saying like it's in our blood, like we're going to do it, like especially for Italian, and just like speaking to the inevitability through like this, like, yeah, who knows, like, yet unverified wood cutting pictures of people like climbing poles during harvest season. Really, really just I love it. I think it's quite romantic. I think people who just find this joy, right? Incredible
Yes.
joy
Yeah.
in anything like fan based. I love
Yes.
it. I'm always really moved by that. Even when it's like against
Yes.
morals or like totally not in line with anything I'm interested in, I'm like, wow, like the dedication, the commitment, right? Like
Yes. I would love to see a fan cam video mashing up the guy who climbed the telephone pole this year to the party 5 years ago of them standing on the Ritz Carlton marquee and it crashing in. And then the same guy 5 years ago who ate the horse scat from the mounted division. That was one of the best possible things. Like, that's what TikTok is for. If we weren't happy enough with Vine, that's what TikTok is for.
Rest in peace, Vine.
Rest in peace, Vine and Quibi and CISO and all that.
Right.
Is Broadway World still around? I feel like that.
Yeah.
I am I wasn't anticipating this, and I wasn't trying, but this actually segues into like it's a nice sort of pivot point to one of the things I've been thinking about. You work as a line producer for the Lincoln Center, which means for the layperson, that's essentially the producer in charge of the budget and other things. But broadly speaking, there we are. One of the things I've been thinking about is the work that you do to help produce art. And back in musicology school, a Walter Benjamin essay, "The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction," and how he was just thinking about with the notion of like the phonograph, the record player, like how technology is changing the way that people receive, consume, digest art.
Yeah.
As someone for you whose job it is to do the work of helping to create that, and then not only that, but creating your own. I wonder if you can reflect with me a little bit about how you see people consuming, enjoying, participating in, and even creating art in the digital landscape of the now second the now third decade of the 21st century? What does it feel like for you?
God, what a gigantic question. Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, first I can speak to the fact that Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts is this behemoth institution
Yeah.
even if people are not aware of the hand that it's had in programming in New York, since like the mid 20th century till now, people are aware of at least the constituents that exist on the campus, that create art in their particular medium, right? So some of the
Mhm.
most well-known constituents on the Lincoln Center campus include, of course, the Metropolitan Opera, the New York City Ballet, the New York Philharmonic, Juilliard School, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are just some of the,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So first, yeah, I have to acknowledge that because since May of last year, most of my conversations around art, conversations around funding of art, is informed by my full-time job here, right? And then underneath all that like drives my exposure to those things is like what I like, right? And I, like any other red-blooded American, definitely, like, I hate admitting this, and I don't know, I shouldn't hate it because it's just reality. But I spend a good amount of time looking through TikTok and Reels and wondering, like, what is it that people are now, like, fiending for? Like, what are people interested in? I consume a lot of media through streaming, and like I spend a bunch of time also like asking myself, like, what am I telling these algorithms about myself? And how much of it is because, like, yeah, I'm being fed all of this like information, secondarily,
Hmm.
or on a tertiary level or quaternary level or whatever, like through
Sure.
young people that I'm like watching their media and reading, continuing to read and then continuing to go to performances. And again, swinging back to the first thing I named, which is like really investigating where does the money flow in terms of like
Yes.
technology and the intersection of art, right? Who's being funded?
Yes.
What kind of art is speaking to those with like the historically deep pockets who've continued to fund art in certain spaces, etc. So I tend to have like a rather cynical view, of technology and art intersecting right now, because when you have, in the millions and billions of dollars to give to an
Hmm.
endowment to
Hmm.
fund particularly technology centric art,
Hmm.
I don't think that the stuff coming out on the other end is actually what's sustainable, because I think the very culture of technology right now is still about ephemeral, digestible, very quickly digestible, and current and urgent things people respond to in
Mm.
like 30 seconds or less or whatever, right? Maybe even 20 seconds or less, right? And it's
Hmm.
still, it's not something that can really be, it's not something that can be perfectly qualified, even with people who have teams of folks who study behavioral science or again can anticipate reactions to whatever. Like, even with that, right, there's like so many misses. So for
Hmm.
me, I am interested in folks whose personal research and practice has seen an evolution of like technology grow very incrementally in their career.
Mm.
I'm not interested in somebody who I might have never ever heard about having a career suddenly appear with this giant resource behind them, and saying like, I'm producing this art. I mean, maybe that sounds very judgmental on my end. Maybe it sounds like what I'm saying is like real artists like don't rely on technology, and that's not what I'm saying at all. But I guess I've kind of talked myself into a circle here.
There's I think what I hear is a question of what of how the artist comes to a place of agency,
Yes.
whether that agency is earned over a decades long body of work, or now in the case of the algorithm, whether it's unexpectedly earned with a viral video.
Yeah, mimicry, really, right? Like
Mm.
in most cases. I wish I could I have a friend whose artistic practice like blows me away. She's an
Yeah,
incredible, I can name her, I'm not going to
please.
talk about her name's Chris Ramon. Kris, and then last name Rumman. Here's the thing about Chris is like, what I can
Sure.
say about Chris is she really intrigues me. Well, first of all, she's just like an amazing person to talk to. I really enjoy my conversations with her. And secondly, her body of work in a variety of disciplines reflects a very clear thread of identity and investment on her part. And some of those projects that she's ideating or working through, they do engage technology, right? And sometimes technology that already exists in every day, but she's found a way to, I don't want to say like, she's found a way to like really freak it sometimes, you know? I love that. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah.
And I'm more interested in that kind of methodology as opposed to someone who's bringing something to the table where it's like tech for tech's sake, right? And it's like this amazing thing does this amazing thing, and it costs this many amazing amounts of dollars to make it do this thing, right? Like it's like when Oculus kind of came on the scene, and in tech could really foresee the development of like, I don't know how much I can say these things in your podcast. I'm not sure if these need to get
No, go ahead. That's fine. Like
Yeah.
we're not sponsored by anybody as of yet, as of tape date. That being said, Google, come get at me.
Yeah.
Come get at Siobahn. Come get at Flypaper. We'll get there in a minute. But like, no complaints.
With Oculus, it's impressive tech, right? And it's tech
Yes.
that we've probably been talking about our entire lifetime, right?
Yes,
Whether
yes.
hypotheticals or like fantastical, like whatever. But then it arrives, and then the question is like still there, right? Like
Yeah.
what for?
Yeah.
How much can you really ask the everyday person to
Yes.
like invest in this piece of machinery that's super cumbersome, even if it wasn't cumbersome, right? Like to put on your head, that doesn't consider like accessibility for folks across the board, and then
Yes.
like watch a movie in there. I can already do that
Yes.
without that thing, or like walk around a world. You know, so this is a thing, like I'm like more of an AR person than a VR
Sure.
person, interested in AR, like augmented reality. I think that approach is something that's always been in art, right? And this like feverish, you know, pitch about like making art on some other plane that's like more like superliminal or hyperliminal. Like this is bullshit to me. Like I'm just not interested in that. So maybe the only sort of space in which that activates and excites me is when it's like completely tied to science. Right? So this may be like antithetical to what I just said, but like for example, people who study exoplanets, right? Like these planets that like we will never ever be on in our lifetime or beyond, and hypothetically never know enough about in the time and the distance they are away.
Yeah.
And they use a bunch of money and technology to, you know, hypothesize about these. Like I support that, right? And I think that that is also artistic.
The Oculus Rift is just $100 or so more expensive at its current cost than what the 1995 Virtual Boy by Nintendo cost.
Right. Exactly.
So it's like, and that was like $300, like in $300 and $1995. So what? Oculus Rift is a couple more, like $500-$600. I don't know, but like
right. And honestly, Polly, like from that scope, right? That like earlier era of Nintendo, what excites people more? The memory of that? I don't think so. I think people remember the glove, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That piece, number one. I think the other piece is that we're messy beings, right? Like we have competing ideas and yens that we hold in tension together. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to, it's not okay to hold things in tension when like that's just a fundamental reality of our existence. That I know I shouldn't have a cheeseburger, but because I just watched the menu like 4 times while I was cleaning my house, like I can't stop having them.
But this is an innocent tension, right? Like what for me with the producer brain, when I'm considering again billions of dollars being allocated to like one project that I can't answer the empirical producer question for. So for me, the most important question a producer must be able to answer is, why does this need to exist?
Yeah.
Why does this need to exist in the world, right? And so, yeah, I probably my revulsion of that like tension is that if I don't, you know, sway that, the sort of pattern of what gets made and what gets produced is just not accurate and reflective of like the people we are, right? There's going to
Yeah.
be just like countless numbers of artists who could never have those resources or never need to have those resources suddenly not just be seen and like just erased. Their visibility is just gone because of some flashy shit that makes people with a lot of money go like, ooh,
Yeah. The same 200 canonized works will continue to get programmed on the same like 10-year
Yeah,
cycle of
on the same 10
like
stages, in the
yeah.
same 10 halls, hallowed
Yeah.
halls, whatever. Yeah.
Just with some other fancy gimmick.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So because we're already doing such a good at solving the problems of the world, such a good job of solving the problems of the world. We've already talked about the nature of being the non-binarized other, like racial other, and clearly solved that, especially as relates to like childhood and early adulthood. What do we do about? Is it fair to name it? Can I just say that conventional Western stage art be so white? Is that fair to say?
Yeah. What do we do about the whiteness of it?
Yeah.
Question. Yeah. So, God, isn't that always the question? Right? Like, and I think that we've seen, to no surprise, right, after some of the really critical questions about how we treat each other or how we acknowledge or shy away from like the systems that shape our country particularly, it's no surprise that we've seen just like this abundance of guilt, right, of white
Mm.
guilt, right? And sometimes white guilt, though personally disgusting for me to experience, I can acknowledge that it does sometimes make a path, right? Even if it's just like
Yeah.
squeezing the door open a little bit where there's just been like, a veritable marble structure just holding it shut. And
Yes.
yeah, so I am really I'm under this kind of punk sensibility where it's like when the door opens even a little bit, like just kick it down, right?
Yeah.
Like go for it, like demand the money, take up the space, take advantage of unprecedented space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think during this time, I'm not here to like, just praise Lincoln Center, but I can say, by my existence there, right? By the sheer ability that I've been given to curate programming under this like new artistic leadership there, that's a direct result of that
Yeah.
time, right? Of people
Yes.
saying, oh shoot, we're being called in or called out or whatever, we're being called on to respond, and we're going to do that by hiring more people who don't look like the typical people and who don't think like the typical people and
Yeah.
who maybe don't live in the same neighborhoods as like most of the people who come to see our art. So yeah, like again, we can point to the internet and that's like the mother of tech, right? As this time during the
Sure.
pandemic where we saw a huge proliferation of art being made easily and cheaply. And for example, like I was listening to something not long ago that spoke to the fact that like queer comedy really took this huge leap during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like even the visibility of like queer writers. The fact that you could
Yes.
even think like, oh, there's a show about queer centric themes, and I know there's queer writers in that writing room. That's not something we could have
Yes.
said, in 2018, 2019, right? So yeah, to like flatten this enormous shadow, right, of like the white institutional presence, it is happening, it's happening through just people showing up, right? People
Mm.
bringing their community into bravely and sometimes like against like all difficulty. Like we can't blame people from not wanting to bring their community into opposition, into
Mm-hmm.
the oppressive space, right? But
Mm-hmm.
more consistently that's done. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, yeah, like I think force is not a bad thing. And I think experiencing something give way because of your will because of your
Mhm.
community's willfulness. It's a really magical and revolutionary thing, and something that like I don't think a lot of Americans thought that they would see or have to contend with in their lifetime. And I'm really
Mm.
happy that we're living in that right now.
A common theme among previous guests of the podcast has been our very existence, our presence, and perhaps even our very survival is in itself an act of resistance.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. 100%.
Mhm.
There is no such thing as an apolitical other.
Mm. What I think I hear in that is that there is a sense of moral authority that is starting to be challenged.
Mm.
There's a presumptive moral authority certainly around Western Eurocentric classical music. The crystallization of the 19th century symphony orchestra, and like vis-a-vis the era of culminating in the era of Mahler, etc., all of which it just represents a particular version of music that would quickly become from the largely public and perhaps not pedestrian, but at least accessible form that it was at one point, to now this form that is still thought of as being one of the highest forms of music, in terms of aesthetics and beauty and poshness. I'll even go as far to say, but it's become by and large highly inaccessible to nearly everyone. I would
Yeah.
say even most white folks. There's not an avenue to actual like personal enjoyment outside of the expectation of enjoyment,
Well,
with the
I'll say
exception of maybe college students for that rush ticket. I don't know.
right. And I'll say this, like this is an extremely petty and not nice thing for me to say, but something I found like just incredibly hilarious was
Sure.
watching these companies come to that realization during the pandemic, because
Mm,
they all were like tripping over each other trying to make digital media, make beautiful beautiful recreations of like what people were missing out on, right? Like
mm,
these people thought, oh, I just have to like make people feel like they're back in the hall or back in the theater, but they didn't understand the medium which through which they were trying to do that. And even when they did quote unquote successfully do that, nobody watched that shit. Very
mm.
few people watched it. Even fewer people wanted to pay for it. And I loved that. I thought that was like just the most delicious, like Schadenfreude, like ever. Like I was like, of course. Like, do you see that now? Like, why would people want that? They need something different,
Yeah.
and you are tired.
On a personal level, I'll just say both conducting, producing, and then doing the post production for virtual choir video was exasperating.
Of course it was, because you probably had all these people telling you like this is how it's got to be and la la
Yeah.
la, and it's just like no, like sorry, you cannot take a live experience and try to recreate it somehow through a digital experience,
No.
because what people want from a digital experience is something that they have, again, agency and engagement within. They don't want to sit in front of a computer and just be like, I'm at the theater. Like it's not the same thing. And I don't know why people didn't grasp that very fundamental truth.
Hmm. Do you think audiences have changed? Because we've spent so much time paying attention to digital media, which you've identified represents the capacity of the viewer to have a level of agency beyond what we would normally associate with the cinema, the symphony, the ballet. Frankly, most of the stand-up shows that I sit in, or some of the long-form improv comedy that I've coached recently. How do you see the behaviors, the needs of audiences changing as the world starts to open back up?
Yeah, I think this answer, have audiences changed? I think they are changing more now than they ever were before.
Yeah.
I think younger people, while maybe in their immediate localities don't have access to the whole breadth of, theatrical experience or artistic experience, that they
Mm.
know that they could, right? That it exists. Like, maybe 20 years ago, there's a teenager in a place like, Bloomington, Indiana. That's not a good example because there's like a lot of opera there. Let's just say like some teenager in some very
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
remote
yeah.
place, can only piece together based on like past media of like their idea of seeing, a performance that's outside of their everyday access.
Sure.
But it's not the same for a teenager today, you know what I mean? And this idea of like people being really like globalized and homogenized
Hmm.
by their like social media intake, and what they're accessing that way. And then just sort of this like kind of middle generation also still having that technological facility, and the people
Hmm.
who determined audience behavior or buying practices or subscription practices, that's really small now,
Yeah.
right? Like those, it's like this reverse telescoping effect now where we're seeing audiences being more populated. And I mean, of course, I'm speaking to this privilege of being in New York City and having a
Sure.
different experience of that, but I can guess, right? I can guess that there are people throughout the country, again, who just have a different breadth of access that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My parents still have my tapes of Jan Hooks and Phil Hartman's era of Saturday Night Live
Hmm.
rolling around, to your point. And now, of course, because of the wonders of an unnamed video streaming service, so does everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And yeah, so I think this entitlement has been a good thing, right? The entitlement
Mm,
that's gone out to the world where people are like, I should be able to see that. I should be able to like access things in retro. Yeah.
mm. I should
This
be able to
usual
have my parents'
model.
Netflix password.
Yeah, that another hilarious walk back, right? The entire corporation saying like, "Oh, just kidding," We saw the imminent like closing of a door, Oh no.
Yeah. I want to do a little bit of a New York speed round. This is a sort of like, what's your favorite or either or round.
Hmm.
Feel free and offer as much or as little explanation as you like.
Okay.
What's a better day out? A really good Sunday gravy somewhere deep in Staten Island, or a Sunday hike wandering the outbuildings of Governor's Island?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. It's hard. I don't know if most New Yorkers have been to Staten Island. Sorry, Staten Island. And for of course, we have to acknowledge that not everybody calls it gravy too, right? Depending, even if you're from an Italian American background, it's like there's the gravy contingent and then the sauce contingent, But yeah, for me, I would say, yeah, I'll go to Staten Island. Why not? Seems like a deeply freaky place to go. Governor's Island, it's a little sanitized, I think, now. What happens there, people identify with Coachella, all that. Now Randall's Island is a weird place. That place, like, I think kind of demands a visit.
The Thinking about the demise by inflation of the dollar slice,
Hmm.
are we losing one of New York's great institutions, or was it just really shitty pizza the entire time?
Yeah, the thing is, I have to defend it. I think that is a part of my like New York crest, is that the
Yeah.
dollar slice and the pizza that's available here is by and large going to, yeah, it is better than most of the pizza in the country. It is the best. It is the best. Bar none. You can't tell me anybody else has better pizza. We also are proven to have better water here, which, as we all know, everything in water informs bread, and how that
Hmm.
tastes. Same reason why we have great bagels, right? Yeah, no, sorry, it'll come back. The dollar slice will come back to the true dollar, and the quality has remained just as good.
It'll be like it'll be the size of a Dorito, but yes, it will come back someday. That would be great. I would love that. What is the best touristy attraction that you would actually go to without having to guide someone around to it?
Yeah, I think this speaks to like what generation of New Yorker I am. Like
Hmm.
not necessarily like actual age generation, but I
Hmm.
moved to New York in 2012, and the High Line had been the most anticipated, fixture of the West Side forever.
Hmm.
And when it was established, like everybody was on there. I mean, people are still on there every single day, but I do think it's a beautiful walk. I think that they have featured a lot of great art on the High Line. I think the High Line's programming is great. Yeah, it's just gorgeous, and it's free. It's free. And even when it's cold, it's nice to be up there. So I think it's always worth having people go see it.
And finally, why is Connecticut?
Oh my god. I can't say enough bad things about Connecticut, honestly. I guess like the only thing really holding Connecticut together is what? Someone's alma mater, a little school that rhymes with bail.
I don't
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. No, I'm very grateful for my time at Yale Divinity School and the School of Drama and the tutelage of Wendell Harrington and the myriad number of beautiful people who are creating beautiful art that I happen to now have an email address for from being there. Anyway, no, I will say if there were a place that we're going to have serious contention for a pie that rivals some of the pies that I've had in New York, it would be New Haven.
Sure, like, but it's like, what? How many places is it? You know, there's like that one famous guy's place.
Yeah.
What's his name? Like, they always say you have to stop there. It was an Anthony Bourdain favorite, right? Like, it was like a actual place.
Yeah, there was Frank Pepe's.
Yep.
And
Yep.
there's a few others, but so the story I'll tell, we're all very aware of the devastation caused by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and if you've ever been down to the lower ninth of that, recovery work still remains undone.
Yeah. I was in New Orleans after Katrina for volunteer work, and it's the
Yeah.
only time I've ever seen New Orleans, you know, which makes me sad because it means I haven't really seen New Orleans, right? So yeah, truly devastating. Sorry, you were saying.
That no, but so West Haven, Connecticut is the same way. There's at least when I was there in 2016, nearly 5 years after the impact of Hurricane Sandy, that recovery just same thing. Like there are talks about how from the rudimentary tagging used to mark houses and how many people used to live there, whether they how much demolition work had been done so far, how badly they'd been looted, that those sketches and artist renderings were what informed like some of the art in a lot of the AAA prestige like dystopian universe games of the present day. Looking at you, The Last of Us. But there's no to your point, talking about like the lower ninth, talking about West Haven, there are these communities that they might not even have less of a tax base, but because some of the basic resources needed to make them livable, like grocery stores, public transit, clean water in some cases, career services, and after-school programs for children, there's just been no recovery.
Yeah.
And entire neighborhoods are at least when I was there in 2021 are still gone.
A lot of the failures of our federal government, and in many cases that can't recover from real states of crisis.
Yeah, had an uncle who worked from FEMA and was stationed in Puerto Rico for a number of years, and I mean it's the same. Like that stupid, just utterly disgraceful picture of President Orange tossing paper towel rolls is just barely a caricature of the way that places like that are treated on the regular, because FEMA does not have the funding to have the infrastructure to distribute the funding that it actually has access to.
Yeah, to our knowledge. Yeah.
Right. Fair. To our knowledge. Fair. What that at least I'll say those are the stories anecdotally that I've experienced. This is a podcast that's supposed to be positive and informing and insightful.
It's good in the title. Let's get some good in here.
We joke about it. These things are uncomfortable, but that's a part of our stories too, right?
Of course.
Like it's a part of the like dealing with the quiet discomfort. I think that so many of us might have just sort of discarded in favor of Netflix or the holistic wellness industry or espresso martini during some of the harder lockdowns. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is there are now, well, what do we do about this? Like, do we identify the collective trauma, the collective compound trauma that we've all continued to have inflicted upon us, which may or may not have been exacerbated by any number of factors, be they municipal, statewide, or federal, or international for that matter? And how do we as humans live with that, move on or not from that? I guess I wish I have an answer. I don't know. What's your answer?
I mean, this is going to be like a pretty like kind of Buddhist answer, I guess. I'm not a Buddhist, but you know, the question of what do we do, right? It's quantum, right? It's like that also includes the question of like what did we do before, right? And the very reality is that disaster. Yeah, just disaster in human nature. It's been there our entire lives, whether we knew it or not, right? And now we feel much more of a collective burden of responsibility because we just know it more, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's, it's a known thing that so many people studying psychology and sociology and all kinds of humanities, like they talk about the fact that we were not meant to consume like tragedy and information at the scale and level and speed at which we do right now. That like it's literally like you wake up in the morning and if you look at your phone you could have like 15 notifications just that you could see initially about all the shit that happened while you were sleeping, right?
Yeah.
Like all over the world. And so again, this is like my kind of Buddhist answer is like first just accept that the world is what it is, right? Mentally, accept the present givens. Because I think the moment that you start with like, why, and why, and now what, and what's next is like, where you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. This is speaking as like a person who like really doesn't experience getting dysregulated well. And this is not talking about like privilege of like, oh, I just don't want to know. It just means that if you are in the know, just accept that you cannot answer to everything.
Yes.
Right. So, again, and then like, I want to move to like the very like late 80s, early 90s kind of thing of like, think global, act local. Right. So I really encourage folks to, find how these things tie back to you. Be involved in your locality. Be involved in your local organizing and policy making. Bring the issues closer to you instead of like just despairing so much, because something that's happening in Michigan, for clean water or on the subject of water, potability of water for like however many years, there's a real through line to the state you live in.
Yes.
There's just going to be, even if it's not the same demographic. And I think people really are only just now understanding that and feeling like they can have access to something. Like here in New York, I live in Manhattan now, but in the borough of Brooklyn, right, which is the biggest borough in New York, thousands and thousands of county committee seats that go empty every year because people don't know that they can just be on county committee, and then those seats get populated by like crooked ass assembly people who then take that legislation to Albany. You know what I mean? Like that's just one example is what I'm talking about is like there is a place that you can be impacting a beautiful change, and if that means for you it's like keeping your yard clean, like that's fine. And so yeah, just I want people to accept but not be defeated by the largeness of everything, and really like kind of like just be aware of what is in your capacity right there. And I think through that kind of practice, you do find yourself in positions where you can make a larger impact. Sounds like I'm running for council or something, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, you have my vote. Why is that so hard though?
Yeah, I think people underestimate themselves at the same time that they're contending with like our culture, right? This culture that we talked about earlier of like quickly digestible, quick, fast impact, donate now, click the link now, read the article. It only takes 4 minutes and 27 seconds or whatever, like I think people get overwhelmed and they feel like I'm already left behind, or they feel a sense of defeat. And again, I think also people don't naturally associate these kinds of acts as relationship, right? They don't see that, in it's relationship centered. Community comes out of relationships. And so maybe there are folks who they don't feel connected to a community yet, or they haven't had the opportunity, or they're waiting, to be found or reached out to. But yeah, it just like it can take a moment just as quickly as, being turned on to like a new product that's being, shipped at you, or yeah. And people are selfish. That's also our nature, right? Like it's hard enough to contend with your own individual life, but then the idea of being asked to make so much space for other people's lives, that's the battle of humanity since the beginning.
What is where is the balance between my relationship to self and what I owe myself. The same thing for the other, the close circle of the other, the philosophical concept of humanity, and then the actual planet we live in. Yay, hooray. One of my favorite British comedians, Bob Mortimer, on his response to this, I don't fucking know.
Yeah. Also the outstanding sort of motto of Gen Z, right? Like, yeah, I don't know, man.
Gen Z, please come listen to my podcast. Anyway, I want to pivot a little bit. One of the things, the more time that I spent Googling you, looking over your body of work.
This is killing me. It's so funny because it's like, I know it's out there, right? Like, we just know that about ourselves, that information just gets out there. But sometimes I'm just like, I can't believe how much is out there. You know, like
it's a lot. Google doesn't yet own my soul, but I feel like we're getting closer and closer to like the Black Mirror dystopian, like Juniper Corporation at some point. You know what I mean? Get back in the writer's room, Charlie Brooker. We need more episodes of Black Mirror because everything has come true already. Please, Charlie Brooker. We need more like prescient prophecy. Like we need to know what to watch out for. Anyway, so as I was like, you know, doing a little bit of work to be ready, I was looking over your performances, your production companies, your work with the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts and others, and across all of these things, I would say that there feels a spirit of entrepreneurial curiosity, because what I discover is you're not just creating art and you're not just producing art, but you're finding ways to both produce your own and then enable others to produce theirs. And I wonder if you can tell me, am I onto something with your work? If so, where does that drive come from?
Yeah, I not to be reductive and like, you know, not give myself the credit or whatever, which I want to do. I do think that
hey, you must be Korean.
To any like really well-adjusted Koreans out there who might hear this, like we're so proud of you. We're really proud of you, and thank you for being good models.
Absolutely, you keep being you.
You keep being you. Yeah, no, I think that honestly, something that I'm proud to be, and you know, you can point to like my Virgo sun. You can point to like any like thing about me. It probably like I probably agree with you is that I have quite an opinion. I have really an opinion on so much. And I think I'm pretty like vehement about some of my snobbery. I just think I have good taste. Like I'll just say it like that. I think I have impeccable taste. I think I have an intuition for what provokes people, what makes people like take an extra second, what makes people stretch beyond themselves. I think that this is exciting, you know, about people, you know, period. And I really live for the moment of seeing someone cross through a veil. You know what I mean? Like I've always been that person that's like, you got to watch this, you got to read this, you got to take a second and see this thing, you know, because I'm so confident at the impact it may have, you know? And so when I am producing, it's almost like I feel like I've left some of this behind, which I'm glad, but like now when I'm producing something, it's because I am like so in love with it, you know, and I want other people to be in love with it too. I guess that does make me like a good, you know, like a politician in a sense, right? Like I think I am a good politician about like what I love. And, you know, when I was a kid, I always found these certain things fascinating, like, you know, the idea of a diplomat, the idea of a missionary, the idea of a cult leadership, right? Like this kind of stuff was really fascinating to me because why wouldn't it be, you know, that you could sway a thought, that you could sway a spirit, that you could redefine an experience for someone, right? Like drag is like this for me, right? Like drag has this incredible power to recontextualize a song. You know, a drag performer can just take a song and make it something you never even thought it was in your life before. Anyway, what I mean is like, if I'm producing something or making space for someone to produce their own work, it's because I'm endorsing it. It's because it's something that I myself would have done had I, you know, had that person's acumen or resources or time or whatever. It means I looked at something and I saw myself there, you know, and that I saw a moment where people could come together and become a community around a moment. Yeah. Again, very romantic, right? Like I'm really into the romance of the sway, of the cell, really, right?
Yeah.
Which is why immediately we talked about, you know, whether you knew these things about me beforehand or not, I promise you we would have talked about opera and the Yankees tonight, because like that's, on my crest, right? And they're
Yeah.
related. The things that I love all are related and have the same power, I think.
What else is on your crest?
This is so ridiculous to say. I think beauty, I think the idea of beauty, and what I mean by that is like the uncanniness of beauty. So many things that I get excited about or really hold my attention or grab me or that I'm like talking about is like something uncanny, right? Something that, against all odds shouldn't exist, or, is producing this effect that you would never, ever, anticipate. This, beauty is a big one. Another one is, these are all words for the same thing, really, right? Like I was thinking like poetry is one. Yeah, same thing. Music, same thing. Yeah, and then there's like all these little things that I've loved since I was a kid that are just like, again, under the same umbrella, like how, like just the sheer beauty of certain things. Like, as a kid, I was really obsessed with like pearlescent soap. I was obsessed with pearlescent, reflective, like iridescent. Something that contains so much and can change like second to second. And, this stuff shows up in random things when you're a kid. It shows up in like, cleaning products or a soap bubble or the way something's animated in a cartoon. Like these kinds of things, like just something that I think I just notice things. So paying attention, that's on my crest, I think, finding a small thing, noticing a small thing and not elevating it, but like creating a bigger space around it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing else to say, but thank you. There's an old media studies philosopher, Bharat, comes through, and perhaps far too much his essay on the grain of the voice gets quoted, and that comes to mind particularly now as social media becomes increasingly post-human, I guess. Like we talk about whatever it is that makes the way that I feel he talks about how artistic expression connects back to like whatever codes it as being distinctively human, usually is what codes it as authentic as opposed to front. And I think what you've just described is like the capacity to have a human experience. Any moment and anything could potentially be that.
Yeah. I'm interested in like raising the stakes on meaning, like I remember as a kid, like the first time that I like ever got a camera, like a film camera, and you could buy like black and white film, right? You can just do that. You've always been able to do that. But as a kid, like, my experience was not seeing black and white photography or sepia photography, right? Like,
sure,
for most kids, I think in America, like in our generation, right, it's color photography. And then the first time I discovered black and white film, like I was so enthralled, right? And I was like, this is incredible. Like, why did anyone ever want color? Like, and I would just spend so much of the little money I had buying black and white film because everything that came out of the film felt like more dramatic, just more dramatic. Yeah. Like, and like I would just like pour over photos of my friends and think like, oh my God, like it just looked like a different type of person, and like the meaning of that moment is just completely something else. And you can't really say it's like a nostalgia that's calling back to something that I knew or anything like that. But you know what I'm saying? Like I'm interested in just one difference, like creating just a higher stakes meaning, like something that just wasn't there before. Yeah.
Something that just wasn't there before.
Yeah.
We are just about at the end of our time. So we have one question left, and it's the same question that we ask everybody as we're closing out our time together. And that is, what do you want the world to look like when you're done with it?
I want the world to be less responsible to its colonized history. I want it to be less white, I want it to look like just more abundant, and more connected. Like I want people to feel less alone, and I want people to feel like what they love could be loved by everybody. Yeah, I want world peace, but I do. I really want people to just feel generally more hopeful and connected and peaceful and less alone and excited about beauty.
Those are not bad things to want. Yeah. Thank you so much for our chat today. This was just delightful.
Thank you, Polly. It was delightful for me too.
Hey fam, it's Polly. If you liked that video, want to join the conversation, be part of this community, click the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing uncommon good. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.